the host of this year's RAV podcast. And so we're going to have a chat tonight about what she's found out during that podcast and give us some of her hot tips as to things, like I said, she's learnt during the recording of the episodes and the interviews that she's had. There's 6 podcasts in all, 6 podcast episodes. And this year, if you've been familiar with the RAV podcast in the past, this year we've gone in depth on this particular topic of caring conversation. So it's a bit of a different format. And in a moment, I am going to bring Patty onto the screen so we can have a really good chat to her around the topic. Okay, so today on the ticker, the all-important ticker, has been a day of champions. We've had the person with our in the gold category. Des Coogan has gone across the line. He's acquired his 200 kilometres and is the first across the line. I think he's actually got 206 kilometres on the board at the moment. And in the silver category, Maria Fraser, the lady we interviewed the other night that did her 100, she's also added another 30 to that kit and has gone across the finish line in the silver. On the screen ticker tonight, we've got the top 10 as they currently stand in each of the categories. So fantastic. Congratulations to all those people. I love the fact that there is a really good gender mix in that. So brilliant. Okay. Now, the other good bit of news for today is that we have hit $45,147 in the fundraising. This is the money that goes directly to NAPCAN for the Love Bites program. And that is has gone around the total amount raised in 2022. So we've already exceeded what we achieved in an entire year in 2022. So how amazing is that? Last year, it was $67,000 in direct donations, and we are well on track to having that conquered as another goal. Okay, without any more delay, I am going to bring Patty onto the screen, and hopefully I'm going to find my vocabulary in the process of doing that. I'm a bit tongue-tied after talking all day. So here comes Patty. And the good thing is I know that Patty is a really good talker. So I'm just going to sit here and be quiet. Oh, Patty, can you talk? I'm not sure we've actually got audio for you.
We've got audio. Can you hear me?
Thank goodness. There we go. It was where your lips were moving before, and I was like, oh, no. Brilliant.
I was trying to be quiet while you were talking, and I was like,
oh, look at you go.
I just didn't want to speak over you. Hello.
That's brilliant. Thank you, my love. How are you?
I'm excellent. I am so excited to be here. And I was going to say, it's a nice change from me having to ask questions. You can do it. Maybe you can even host the podcast next year.
Yeah. I think people hear enough of my voice already, don't you? I think they've got exposure therapy already with me. So, Patty, caring conversations. When we looked around for a podcast interview, a host for this year, when we saw your credentials and saw your experience, it was a bit of a lay down misère that you would be the person hosting this year's podcast. For the people that don't know the famous Patty Kikos, could you... In my world, you are. Could you share a little bit about who you are and I guess, that particular part of your career that makes you a fantastic host for talking about caring conversations?
Well, I'm a social worker by trade. So I've been a qualified social worker since 1998. And would you believe that I started my career in domestic violence? And it didn't scare me off. I'm still here and I'm still as passionate as ever. And I've worked in different sectors. I've worked in child protection. I still do that now. And I've worked in aging and disability. And throughout my life, I also had a couple of different segues. I became a marriage celebrant. And funnily enough, our last guest is also a wedding celebrant. And I also became a yoga teacher. And that was more because I needed to learn some resources to calm my own nervous system down. And so I did that for a little bit of time, and social work called me back. And one thing that I love is talking to people, and I have a fantastic memory for people's stories. I don't have such a great memory for Excel spreadsheets. So if you had to tell me by the 10th time, you'd probably want to wring my neck.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be fun for you. But I love hearing people's stories. And I think what makes me a great interviewer is the fact that as a social worker, you have to have that ability to help someone feel very comfortable very quickly. Because often, if
Mm.
you're doing intake and someone's going to tell you about something extraordinary that happened to them on the worst day of their life, they have to know that you are unequivocally present and that you are invested 150% in their story and in how you're going to help them. So I think that's what makes me want to be a podcast host, because I genuinely want to go there. I want to go where no one else wants to go, and I want to shine a light on people's knowledge. And that's what makes me passionate about podcasting. And it's a little thing that I say to my clients, which might be applicable here, which is I might have a visual impediment. I've been wearing really thick glasses since I was 2, but I'm always going to find your light. And I think that's important because it's never about me. I'm the conduit. I just want to know what I can share with the world, because over the years I've had the privilege of meeting so many people and hearing so many stories and being enamored by resilience, by extraordinary courage. And I think the world needs to hear more of that.
Absolutely. So, carrying conversations, obviously, your social work background helps
Yeah.
you navigate that topic really well, and that comes out in the interviews that you're on very familiar ground during those conversations. But as you say, in every conversation, there's unique twists and turns, and we always learn something with every conversation we have. So, what are some of the highlights for you in terms of the conversations that you were having and key learnings that you walked away with? Maybe it reinforced something you already knew, or that it's a new angle on something that you've been looking at for a while.
It's a big question. So I'm going to go on some tangents. So pull me back and prompt me, because I think that I can talk forever about this.
Yep.
Number one is that I've always learned something. So even though I was the host, even though I did the pre-production and I did the post-production, I learned something new from every single interview. And like I said to you, I've been a social worker since 1998. I've been around for a very long time. And I took at least 5, if not 10 things, but I did genuinely learn something new from every single interviewee who shared very generously. Can we just have a moment to talk about how amazing our guests have been this year?
Yeah, phenomenal. And just the
Yeah,
mix of people with lived experience as well as then subject matter experts on it. It's been an incredible mix that you've got together.
we got together. That wasn't just me. That was you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
I
it's
don't
a team effort.
I created all of this. This was very much a wonderful joint effort, and I love the collaboration aspect of it. In this particular for this particular podcast series, I was able to collaborate and have access to you more than I usually do. So we've been able to go back and forth and just, what's that word? Soundboard with each other. And I'll say, this doesn't sound right. In fact, a few minutes earlier, we were doing this about something else. And I said, I this doesn't quite feel right. What do you think? And it's usually me that makes those decisions. So it's been quite refreshing to have you to bounce ideas from. But back to your
Mhm.
question, something that I find has really helped me is curiosity. So being genuinely curious about somebody's intention. So I find that in my personal life, if someone makes an inadvertent mistake, an inadvertent error, whether it's something trivial like we booked the wrong restaurant for the wrong time, or I said something and I really didn't mean to upset you, intention is everything for me. So if there's a good intention that just wasn't conveyed very well, it's like, that's really interesting. So I'm really curious as to why I responded like that, or why I responded like that this time and with this person. So curiosity is really, really interesting. Like, the other thing as well, and we'll hear this a lot more, so I don't want to give too much away, but we'll hear about this a lot more with tomorrow's episode that's dropping with Dr. Hayley Boxall. And the importance of understanding my perspective. So a lot of people will see me and think I'm this white woman that's educated, but I'm actually not. I didn't speak a word of English until I was 5. And I'm connected to two different cultures that are vastly different. So, in a professional setting, I always want to make sure that I'm not coming from the lens of a white, cis, and hey, let's call it like privileged woman that's been educated. Do I want something for you that's different to what you want for yourself? Like, obviously, personal safety, aside, am I projecting what I think is best for you? Or am I actually taking the time to listen to what you want?
Mm,
And that's really important because, as we've probably talked about before, leaving the relationship is not always necessarily the answer.
mm, mm. And that comes across very strongly in Haley's interview in a way that I haven't heard before. Is this putting at the centre that in a lot of situations it's not practical to leave, nor do they necessarily want to leave, but they do want to feel safe, and they want a healthy relationship. And when you change it to that as the starting point for work, which is what RAV does too, is put healthy relationships as the focus of the work.
Yep.
It's a very different perspective, and I really love how you and Haley explore that. You said tomorrow, drops tomorrow, doesn't it? It's
Yeah. Yeah.
we're on number 4 already, aren't we?
Can you believe
Gosh, 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 gosh. The curiosity piece is very interesting as well because Brenton touches on that. Tim touches on that. In virtually every episode, it
everyone
comes
does?
up
Hmm.
in different ways, expressed in different ways, but entering the conversation with curiosity, with an open mind to explore what's going on rather than going in with either a
Yeah.
conversation already happening in your own mind um, or that it's, stereotypes, assumptions, all those sorts of things. It's
Yeah.
really critical to create that open space.
And I think also gentle, loving respect. Taryn spoke about it as well. She
Mm,
said, if you just come up to me and you were my really good friend and said, hey, this is not normal, like you not having a bank card is not normal, she would have become very defensive and she also wouldn't have felt safe enough to open up to somebody else. Or to that particular friend when she herself would have realized that this, in fact, was not okay and she was being manipulated and financially abused. So this almost oxymoron. What do you call it when something is a juxtaposition? Like gentle, soft, almost loving respect of, hey, I could be wrong, but this is what I've noticed. Or I've noticed that you're not happy and you don't have to talk about it. But if you ever do, I'm here to listen and I'm not here to judge. I've also, Kiralee, had the personal experience of really being quite forthright in encouraging people to leave their relationships. And then there was this, first of all, lack of maturity on my part because it was many years ago, but also an awkwardness afterwards when they go back. And so I'm grateful that my first official social work job was domestic violence because I learned about the pattern of it's never going to be a clean break. And if it is, it's a very rare phenomena. But
mm,
it's also about holding space in that awkward no man's land. And
mm,
then I had the opposite extreme experience of another girlfriend saying, I just said something really big about leaving him and it felt like you almost didn't want me to. And I had to explain and say, it's not that I do or don't. It's just that if you do, I'll support you. But if you also decide to stay, I'm also going to support you. And that was probably clumsily conveyed, but that was really
mm.
important for you to know. And I referenced a previous friend and said, because when she went back, there was this awkwardness between us because I'd said some hideous things about him. And then I was there having dinner with him.
Mm, mm,
So there was that.
mm,
And it's that, let me hold space for what you want and what you need. How can I support you? And how can I support the relationship that you both want to have but might be grappling to have? Because there's so many supports for people that leave a relationship, but what about people that are in a relationship that have a lot of strong ties to their cultural identity and what that does for their reputation and for the stripes that they earn? So how can
mm,
we do that in a way that means that we're there? And sometimes we're there supporting someone where we don't necessarily agree with the decisions that they're making, but our support is more important for them than our opinions.
mm, mm. In fact, in most situations, I suspect that that's the case. It's really nicely expressed. Um, and in Dr. Tim Moore's interview, when we're talking about how to have conversations with children, in particular, that holding space principle comes up, where they have opinions, they have perspectives, they need to be heard. And part of being heard is to actually stop talking and
Yeah,
stop trying to fill a space because we're uncomfortable. And
yeah.
it's and actually allow them to express what's important to them. And another key thread talking about talking is that and we saw this in Taryn's interview, Tim expressed it as well, is the need to actually have words to describe, and Brenda Lynn as
Oh,
well,
Brenda
needs to
Lynch
have,
was a big one.
yeah, have the words to describe what they're experiencing. So
Mm.
particularly with young people, they have feelings around things, but not necessarily the vocabulary to express it. And that it made Brenda Lynn's journey incredibly difficult when she was young. And
Oh,
also,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah. So it's that was one of the threads that I guess really came up for me around that use of language and having simple words and emotion. So,
That was another key thing for me as well, because I had a period in my life, and I don't know if it's the same for you, where I was just fluent in therapy talk. So in everyday conversation, that didn't necessarily translate very well. In fact, it was often lost in translation. So, I'd use phrases like, holding space. And people would say, what does that even mean?
yes,
And
yeah.
and so I think it's really powerful for us to come together and have common language. You know, I I I
Mm,
I, I know that when I was younger, when I was in high school, I didn't know what anxiety was. I kind
mm,
of knew what depression was, but now I sometimes think, yeah, the kids are going to be all right. They're really well versed in not just pop culture talk, but in deep things that we need to be able to have a common language with in society. And Brenda, like
mm,
you said, she mentioned that when you come from an Asian family, you don't have depression. Get over it. Get over it.
mm,
Get
mm,
and that's the same in many similar cultures that I experienced as well. Um, I went to a school in Sydney. I went to a high school that wasn't necessarily a low socioeconomic sort of high school, but it was kind of a rough school, and we were a bit of a rough year, I've got to say. But I went to a school where there weren't a lot of Anglo-Saxon Australians. There were a lot of
mhm,
Greek people. There were a lot of Lebanese people. There were some Jewish people, Macedonian people. There were some Asian people. So it was an incredibly multicultural school. And I went to school where I was friends with everyone. So I learned to genuinely be non-judgmental in spaces where I had my fellow schoolmates get married off to someone from their home country and then come to school pregnant in year 11 and 12, because that was part of the culture, that you got married young and then you had babies. And when you are that young and you do grow up in a multicultural environment like I did, there isn't racism. There's just this genuine curiosity of like, wow, show me, tell me, oh my goodness. And
mhm,
it wasn't until years later, I went to university and then I went traveling around the world, and then I'd come back and I'd see the same people. And there were, a certain amount of kids that they'd had. But the thing that was really different is that their husband, or yeah, in most cases, it was their husband, didn't speak English and were quite violent towards them. But then their families wouldn't take them back because it would have put a lot of shame onto that family. So it's like, well, hang on a minute. This is really important to you, and this is really important to your
mm,
cultural and social identity. So you don't want to leave the relationship, but there are certain dynamics that need to change within the subculture. Now, as an outsider, I've got an in because I've known you for so many years. I went to your wedding.
mm,
You taught me
mm,
about sex education. So how can we have a common language and community where this sort of stuff is not spoken about? How can we
mm,
be so
mm,
people? How can I still be an ally where I'm not coming across as smug or judgmental, but genuinely wanting to learn from you? Because you're going to
mm.
teach me, because you know about your culture. But hey, so do I, as someone who has always been a welcome guest. And I still want to be
Yes,
that.
yep. Yeah, absolutely. And Brenton touches on that too when he talks about his work with as a case manager
That's
and going
right.
into families and honouring the fact that you've been invited into that house and you're in their home, and honouring that and
Yeah.
listening and
Yeah.
helping them step through processes. Well, that's fantastic, Patty. We're done 20 minutes already. So,
What?
so any last comments or wrap up? So try and keep the sessions to about 20 minutes. So yeah, in terms of what's coming up in with the podcast, we've got a couple left to do to land.
We do, we do. I'll quickly tell you,
Mm.
we've got the fabulous Dr. Haley Boxall, who is just
Mhm.
yet another person with a doctorate that's refreshingly down to earth and pretty hilarious.
Yes, she's very.
We've got Tasha Jones, who is a proud Gomeroi woman who has experience of family violence, but also partner violence. And she has a triumphant story of moving her
Mm,
4 kids into a shed, qualifying an a TAFE course, getting credentials,
mhm,
leaving her husband, but then reconciling in the most beautiful way, yet in a healthy
mm,
dynamic. And that was just extraordinary. And speaking of hilarious, she's pretty down to earth and hilarious. And having a yarn with her was an absolute honor because she opened up so deeply and honestly about her
mhm,
personal journey. And then finally, we wrap it up with Brenton, who has that lived experience. Again, as a youth social worker, the Salvation Army was a very poignant part of his story and why they're significant in his family's life. And the elephant in the room, of course, was that, hey, I'm a white man and I'm coming into your home. So I'm going to be extra respectful, not just because I have to, because the law says I have to, but because it is an honor to be let in. And his
mm,
tips are amazing. That was a great ending to our 6 interviews, wasn't it? Because his,
mm.
that's the sort of episode where you're going to need a piece of paper or just read the transcript because
Yeah,
he
all
goes
that. I've listened
so
to all of them multiple times, yeah, because they are just there's so much in them that you can keep going back and listening time and time again. Thank you,
yeah,
Patty, for all your hard work on all of that. The RAV podcast can be accessed on any or pretty much all the major podcast platforms, so Spotify and Apple podcasts and all the ones, Listener, whatever. They're all out there. Or if you or you can just go into the RAV website and you'll see a tab at the top for podcast, and the latest episodes are at the top of the list. So
I can say
thank
one
you.
final thing as well, Kiralee. It's
Yes, of
that
course you can.
you don't have to be a professional to get real nuggets of information here. It's
Mm,
all of this wonderful information is accessible to anyone, whether you've got kids coming over because your children have sleepovers, or you're hosting a barbecue, or you're
mhm,
part of a family that has a lot of children. This is not just for professionals that have like a degree. This is something that's
mm,
for anyone. And
yeah.
if you are loving the podcast, it would be amazing if you could give the podcast algorithm a helping hand with a 5-star review or subscribing. It just means that we get to the right listening ears for people that actually need to hear these conversations the most.
Absolutely. And that was my big takeaway on how simple a lot of the things are. The steps are involved in having caring conversations. You don't need degrees to do it. There are some simple principles that, if you apply them, then you're going to feel quite a lot more confident in holding
Yeah.
those conversations. Thank you, Patty. We'll possibly get you back toward the end as well. And yeah, we'll maybe get some questions going from people about some of the content that's been in those podcasts. So thank you again for all your hard work.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, speak to you soon.
Bye now.
Bye.